My name is Ted Bestor. I'm the professor of social anthropology and director of the Reischauer Institute of Japanese Studies here at Harvard. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to a symposium today, remembering and contemplating the future of the disasters of March 11th, 2011. Before we begin, I would like to ask for a moment of silence in memory of the some 20,000 souls who were lost today, 2 years ago. I think none of us in the room can forget the images we saw splashed across our screens 2 years ago as video feeds from throughout Japan were being broadcast live on network television, on Japanese television, streamed on computers. A lot has happened in the 2 years since then, lots of reflection. I'm only going to speak for a couple of minutes to try and get us started, and then I'm going to turn it over to our moderator, Susan Pharr, who will introduce our three speakers today, Professors Takeuchi, Professor Mori, and Professor Kawachi. The title for my very brief interlude is Images of Disaster, but I want to emphasize that these are not images of the disaster as it occurred. These are the images in retrospect, things that people have thought about the earthquake. And I think they give us a reason to contemplate the significance of the earthquake, the tsunami, and the nuclear disaster in people's lives and people's subjective consciousness, both as a moment of sorrow, but also as a moment of optimism. And so I hope that some of these will stir contradictory, ambivalent thoughts amongst us all. Let me begin with an illustration which appeared in the New York Times last week with an op-ed piece about memories of the earthquake. And I think the significance I put to this is that it's not only an image of a Japan that has been fractured, but it's also an image of a Japan that's being put back together. The pieces are coming together. The next set of slides are photos that I took of posters that were on the outer fence of the Tsukiji Honganji Buddhist temple in Tokyo during the summer of 2011. These are posters that were donated by citizens across the country. This is just a small selection of the roughly 75 to 100 posters that were up there, but these were the ones that I thought were noteworthy. Oh. The slides have been reversed in their orientation. They're now sideways. In any case, I think you can get the same idea from this one. I wish they wouldn't have done that.
Yeah, me too.
Well, okay, maybe we can go through it that way.
Okay.
Well, we'll see. Okay. Well, that one's, changes. No, the aspect ratio is off. In any case, I think the images will still speak, even if you have to sort of tilt yourself this way. Imagine the earth is moving underneath you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. So here are the posters that are hung on the fence. Another image of reconstructing Japan piece by piece. A poster of, I suppose, a smiley face. Shitori janai yo, hitotsu da yo. You're not by yourself. We're all together. Another image of a jigsaw puzzle, hitotsu zutsu, piece by piece, or one by one, step by step. Another step by step, ichidan soshite mata ichidan susunde ikou. A recognition of the issues of the nuclear disaster. This is somebody in a TEPCO hazmat suit. Gemba gambare. Hang in there at the scene. This has to do with panic buying. It's saying, you can't quite read it here, but it says, the ordinary water of Tokyo is oishii. Stop panic buying. That is to say, stop buying bottled water, stop hoarding. Another of the same vein, a shopping cart full of onigiri. Just buy the amount that's necessary. Stop panic buying. Human power. Gambaro Nihon. Hang in there, Japan. And then my personal favorite for prescriptions for optimism, hope, and recovery in Tohoku. Drinkers of Japan. Drink sake from Tohoku. So you can see that even in the immediate aftermath, these were posters that I was taking pictures of in July of 2011. So less than 4 months after the disaster. There's humor, there's optimism, there's hope, there's sorrow, but there's also an effort to reconstruct Japan, to imagine a future in which people will be able to pull together, exhibit solidarity, and create a new and hopefully better Japan. So with that, I will turn it over to Susan Pharr, who will introduce the speakers, and then I'm looking forward to some very interesting presentations from our speakers today. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much to all of you for joining us today. This event is co-sponsored by the Reischauer Institute and the Program on U.S.-Japan Relations. Before we begin, I would just be interested, since March 11, 2011, how many of you have actually been to the Tohoku area? I'm just interested. So a great many of you have. Since that time, 2 years ago, the Reischauer Institute and the Program on U.S.-Japan Relations have had literally more than a dozen events of various kinds looking at different aspects of those disasters and the aftermath and the problems and issues raised by them. We've had programs on the future of nuclear energy in Japan and on the Fukushima plant itself. We've had programs on food safety, on the psychological and cultural dimensions of events in Tohoku for Japan and for the Tohoku residents themselves. We've had seminars on the effects on the security alliance with the U.S. and the views that came out of it through the Operation Tomodachi. So we've looked at many aspects, but today, given that this is a memorial event, we wanted to focus on the future and look at the rebuilding effort. At Harvard, literally hundreds and hundreds of faculty and students have been involved in various ways with the recovery effort. 3 faculty today report on their own efforts in their own particular fields. So we'll have our session today with 3 presenters. We will end promptly at 2 because our speakers have to teach this afternoon, and we will go in the order that appears on the poster. Our first presenter will be Hirotaka Takeuchi, who's a professor at the Harvard Business School. He is faculty chair for Japan at the Business School and a professor of management practice. He received his bachelor's degree at ICU and then in Japan, and then he had a PhD and MBA from UC Berkeley. Before joining HBS in 2010, he served as the founding dean of the Graduate School for International Corporate Strategy, that is the business school at Stotsubashi University. He is the winner of numerous prizes for his many publications on issues such as Japan's global competitiveness, knowledge creation, and many, many other topics. Our second presenter will be Toshiko Mori, who is the Robert P. Hubbard Professor in the Practice of Architecture at the Design School. She formerly was chair of the Architecture Department. She has her own architectural firm. She also has won many prizes and has been profiled in the New York Times. And her work has a book focusing on her work, was published in 2008. Our third presenter is Ichiro Kawachi, professor of social epidemiology and chair of the Department of Social and Behavioral Sciences at the Harvard School of Public Health. His master's and PhDs, or MD degree rather, and PhD from Otago University in New Zealand. He has over 400 articles on the social and economic determinants of population health. He was elected to membership in the Institute of Medicine of the U.S. National Academy of Sciences, and he will be presenting on his work at the School of Public Health. It is an honor and privilege to turn things over to this very distinguished panel, beginning with Professor Takeuchi.
Thank you, Susan. It's always good to be back at the Reischauer Institute. Susan was the first person to send me an email congratulating me for returning to the Harvard Business School. I was here from 76 to 83, and after retirement at Hitotsubashi, came back here. So the first email came from Susan, not the dean of the Harvard Business School. I don't know where you get your information. But there are seats up here in the front. There's also a reserved seat right next to Godon Sensei. So if people in the back, being a Harvard Business School professor, I feel if the seats are not full, I feel as though, this is subpar. So would people in the back kind of move forward here, please? While nobody's making the move. At the business school, they will jump, at the opportunity of sitting right next to Godon Sensei. Okay, now we have too many, but that's okay. So I have 15 minutes. I will try to show some slides of two experiences I had in 2012 and 13. And this is a program called IXP. Immersion Experience Program at the Harvard Business School. So kind of following on what Ted was showing, the photo that hits my heart the most every time I see it is this one. So this was 2 years ago. And boy, what can you do with Mother Nature? And the program I'm going to talk about is this. It says the classroom expanded. It's the first time for Harvard Business School to give credit to a non-case method course. This was a field study, so in its 105-year history, I was the first one to lead this course, which was a field study. And students got credit for going to Tohoku from January 6th to the 14th, the first time. And we went this year again from January 7th until the 17th. So I am going to show the results of those two trips, the first in 2012, the second in 2013. I do have a little video clip at the end for the 2012, the 13 trip. So let me begin. So all 20 of us from the Harvard Business School went to Tokyo and Tohoku. The Harvard Business School doesn't go cheap. We stayed at the Intercontinental Hotel. This is in preparation for our 2-week stay. The students had to pay this year $3,500 on their own and pay for airfare on their own. And I'm proud to say that this year there was a China IXP, a Brazil IXP, an India IXP, South Africa IXP. The Japan IXP had 3 times more students apply over the China IXP. So there was something that the students really wanted to come spend their money, even though we were staying in a place like this. Now, this is last year. Do you recognize this man in the middle? Ken Watanabe. So he's very dedicated to Tohoku. When he heard that we are, by the way, we do have someone sitting in the room who is this person here. Can you raise your hand? So he's one of the 2011 participants. So here we are, 20 of us, and Ken Watanabe heard that 20 Harvard Business School students came to do volunteer work and write cases on 4 companies, and he made a very touching presentation at Davos a week and a half after we met here. So I was a moderator for him, and he was basically selected by the Japanese government to tell the world, thank you for your support. It was a good thing that the Prime Minister didn't come. He had a tremendous impact. He read the translation of Ame ni mo makezu, kaze ni mo makezu in English, Miyazawa Kenji's poem. And people in the room at Davos were in tears. So, you know, government sometimes does something right. And this time it was Ken Watanabe. We went and visited 4 companies. The first one is Fast Retailing. This is Uniqlo. And the person sitting in the middle is the richest man in Japan, Yanai-san. So if you need funding, he's the man to go. And he welcomed us because Fast Retailing opened their stores right after the earthquake, temporary store. And the question was, how could you do it so quickly? And the students wrote a case on them. The second company we visited is Ishinomaki Koan Hospital, and it's run by a company called Ken Ikukai. And look at that. I mean, they had this banner. They made this banner just for us. And there were about 7 of them in Tokyo as well as in Ishinomaki. When we went this year, they had the same one with a different date, says 2013. But, you know, what a great gesture on their part. Both of them, you know, these companies are saying, thank you for coming all the way, 7,000 miles to Japan to help the Tohoku area. And so this was their way of showing their gratitude. We did visit Lawson. Ninami is a graduate of the Harvard Business School. And Lawson, 7 days later, the food was delivered. And famous, words from Ninami was, deliver the goods, the food in 7 days, forget about costs. So imagine how that goes at the Harvard Business School when the CEO says, forget about costs. And the 4th company we visited was Yamato. And Kikawa-san also said the same kind of thing. He says, deliver goods, whatever, profitably, doesn't matter. And the students basically, were in awe with these CEOs, meeting them personally and being able to write a case on them. So we also visited their Tohoku activities, delivering goods for Uniqlo in a bag. And it was very important to put it in a bag because the Tohoku people hadn't shopped for a while. So the shopping experience for them was fun. And this is an example of that. This is Ishinomaki Koan Byoin right after the earthquake. But 3 weeks later, they had outpatients service ready. In September 1, the hospital was rebuilt. So how could they do it in 6 months? That was kind of the question that the students raised. This is Lawson. And again, in 7 days, food was delivered from the Kanto area to Tohoku. And, you made all the money in Kanto, but they said, no, forget it. Ninami said, deliver all food. And the packaging that they used was not legal. You have to have all the, what's in the side and so forth. And they didn't have time to create that packaging. And Ninami says, screw the government, just deliver the food. And that was his decision. And this is the famous Yamato transport truck 6 days after the earthquake. And they teamed up with the Japanese self-defense force. So self-defense force was working under the direction of Kuru Takubin, because Kuru Takubin knew the residents much more than the Jietai. So Jietai said, we're going to work under your direction. Tell us how many people are living here, whether we should rescue the inhabitants or not. So amazing stories from. We also had experts who talked to us. And before that, we did some volunteer work. This is half days of work at Onagawa. So back then, this is 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, there were a lot of debris. So this is what we gathered from a fishing village in half a day. I'm in the red hat. We also worked with GEN, which is an NPO, and the landlord of this lot in Ishinomaki wanted the palm trees moved out. And so there were 20, plum trees in his lot. And he wanted it removed so that he could build some kind of a home for visitors visiting Ishinomaki. So we worked with Jen on this. What was interesting is, leave it up to Harvard Business School students, and we teamed up. There were 7 teams altogether. It became a competition. Who would pull out the tree the fastest? And the fastest group were 3 women MBAs. So we were about almost last in this effort. So this was 2 days of volunteer work. We also talked with outsiders who also helped with the disaster relief. First was the Tomodachi, the U.S. Embassy's team. And I think without their help, I don't think Japan would have recovered as quickly. Clearing Sendai Airport in 2 days, just an amazing feat. So this was one of them. We also talked to the vice chairman of JR East. No casualties, no accidents. The Shinkansen stopped before the tsunami hit. How could that be? So we heard him talk about that, the technological advances, the seismic, I think, shock, sends some signals, and the trains are supposed to stop before the tsunami hits. We also talked to James Kondo, who's the head of Twitter in Japan. Cell phones didn't work, PCs didn't work, but Twitter became the lifeline. And he's one of my students, and he gave us a presentation on that. So as a result, we wrote 5 cases. The A case, I basically owed, I've been promising people that I'll be sending these cases. They have been released. So it's now available. So I will, and you can buy it, by the way. So the A case talks about what happened on 3/11, just the facts. The B case talks about fast retelling's response. If you look at the first line, you will not be able to read it, so let me read it for you. Yanai Tadashi, CEO of Fast Retailing, ate dinner at a sushi restaurant near his office in Tokyo the evening of March 11th, 2011. And that was fact. He basically said, we're on autopilot. The local store managers will know what to do. They have studied my 23 principles. Leave it up to them, it'll be okay. The HR department at Pharr wanted me to erase this sentence because people will misunderstand the statement. I erased the second sentence, which was on the next day, he went out to Kogane to play golf. That I erased. But I asked Yanai-san, HR wants to delete this. What do you think? He says, leave it there. It's me. So that's the B case. The C case is on Ishinomaki Koan Hospital, how they were so able to so quickly resume service, outpatient service. The D case is on Lawson. The bottom of the line says, deliver food, this is Ninami talking, to disaster victims within 7 days and disregard cost. Harvard Business School students had a difficulty initially, but they said, okay, this is what leaders do in crisis. Same thing with Yamato, just basically the Kikawa-san said, disregard profitability. So we have these 5 cases. If you notice, the students' names are on the case, and we have Leo Kosinski, who's sitting right there, as the author of the case. And this is very unusual. Usually the student's name appear at the bottom of the case. I had to negotiate with the business school to have all the names of the students on the cases. But the restriction is the Harvard Business School professor has to be on top. So for each case, you'll see my name on top. I edited the case, but I didn't write them. This year, the theme was innovation for recovery. So the first year was on quick response. The second year was on recovery. So what is it that companies are doing to create jobs, to create a new industry, to create a new way of thinking? And so we went, again, 30 students this year, 20 last year, but 30 this year. And we split up into 6 teams in Tokyo and in Tohoku. We spent 2 extra days this year doing volunteer work. So we did 4 days of volunteer work rather than 10 last year. And I am going to go through the slides that they have put together. This is the 2013 team that came back about a month ago. They are now currently writing cases. They've finished writing the cases. But this is kind of the image of what they came through. So 30 of them made a presentation on the last day, on a capstone presentation to the alumni on their takeaway. So each student picked a photo and made a 1-minute speech on takeaway. Now, last year when Leo's group did it, there were 20 of you, and how many were in tears? So they were in tears and talking about their experience. And so I'm just going to go through the 30 very quickly. It's in chronological order on what we did, but I'll give you an idea of the kinds of program that we put together in Tokyo and in Tohoku. So this is an NPO person we worked with in Tokyo. This is the community market in Onagawa. So they created a market all on its own. So you can buy things with this money that they created for this little town of Onagawa. I don't think it's official by MOF, the Minister of Finance regulation, but this is ingenuity on the part of the local community. So a student picked this. This is some of the devastation in Onagawa. They were very impressed with the Qatar Friendship Fund. For them to be donating that kind of money for Onagawa was very impressive. One of the students very impressed with the orderliness of the temporary housing. And so he picked this one. And this is a group that we worked with last year and this year, MPO, Jen. We'll show you a little video of this. This was hard work for the students. We spent half a day clearing the gutter of one of the fishing villages. And what we found out that the experience of working for the military helps. These guys were strong. The Japanese students could only do 1/3 of what they could do. So when it comes to moving stuff like this, leave it up to the military. So that was our experience. We saw a video of the Kamaishi Miracle where the children actually saved about 100 lives in Kamaishi by telling the adults, move, just go up the hill. So we saw a video of that. This is some devastation in Rikuzen Takata. Same thing in Rikuzen Takata. One of the volunteer works was painting the fishing boats of Genki Mura in Rikuzen Takata. The students are diligently doing that. We also painted buoys. At the end, they allowed us to do this. So when we go back, this may be floating on the ocean, which makes us feel good. We also made some mochi with the Genki Mura wives. They call themselves Nadeshiko, and they will appear on a video later on. So this is Nadeshiko and Genki Mura. We also visited a high school in Ofunato, and it was on a Sunday, but 100 students came. And what was interesting is one of the teachers, when we walked in, looked at us and said, "Hey, tamayosaso da be." These guys look so intelligent, is their first word when they saw our students. So these are our students in Ofunato, mingling with the students who all spoke English and had a calligraphy program for us and other skits for us. So a couple of students chose that. We also did go to Fukushima. It was 35 kilos away from the nuclear plant, but we did go there. Worked with a farmer in Anzai Fruit Orchard company, because Harvard Business Schools are good at consulting. So they spent a day consulting with the owner and telling them, do this, don't do this from a strategy point of view. This is part of the discussion session. The owner is in the middle here, an older gentleman. And he says, "My God, this is free consulting from McKinsey, BCG, and Bain," because half the students have consulting experience. So he was very delighted. We also did a consulting project for this man in the middle, Ono-san, who runs a chrysanthemum and tomato farm. Again, the same thing. The students analyzed the situation, gave him suggestions. What was interesting is he's second generation. His father used to be the head of Nokyo, so he's the second generation. His son here, Ryuta. So we asked him, "What are you going to do in the future?" His answer was, "I'm going to become shacho." So succession planning, not that difficult in Tohoku, I guess. So this is him getting a thank you note from us. We also visited a town called Ogatsu. And the company's name is actually Ogatsu, from Ogatsu. And this man, Tachibana-san, who used to be with Itochu, moved to Ogatsu and is doing fishery and trying to recreate that industry. So a couple of us wrote an article, a case on that. We also wrote a case on Oisix, which is an online delivery company for groceries, especially vegetables. And so they are very interested in food safety. And they have been instrumental in raising the bar. So we're writing a case on them. We're writing a case on Uniqlo again. We're also writing a case on Yahoo Japan, who established an Ishinomaki office to help the local businesses. And about 20 businesses are working under Yahoo Japan's support to revive the industry. We're also writing a case on this company called U-Home Clinic, which is home care center. So rather than having hospitals, the doctors will come to your home for all the support. This man here is the founder of U-Home. He used to be one of the doctors taking care of the emperor. Then he quit that. He's an MD. Went to work for McKinsey and Company for 3 years. And then said, no, this is not for me. Went back into home care in Tokyo. And when the earthquake hit, he returned. He's from the Tohoku area. So he now has a clinic over there. So we're writing cases on these companies. So this is from Genki Mura. Everywhere you go, they have these posters. Welcome, Harvard Business School. Thank you for coming all the way. And they had a lot of events for us. This is working with Jen. We did mochitsuki with them, a lot of cultural things. So this is what we ate. Just fresh off the making here. This is a group at Genki Mura. The women here are the people who made lunch for us. They call themselves Nadeshiko from the Japanese Women's World Cup soccer team. And this is the kind of food they made for us. Probably the most delicious, what do you call these things? Scallops we've eaten anywhere, fresh off the ocean. So this is Ofunato High School with 100 students. We did this. This is one of the Anzai farm people. We also did have some fun. The students went to Tsukiji at 6 o'clock in the morning. So we were able to sneak in because I think they have some regulation now on how many visitors can come. So they keep taking pictures of the octopus. We also went to the sushi place where we actually made our own sushi. The owner of this sushi restaurant was the guy who spent 1.5 million to buy the first tuna fish on the bid, the most expensive tuna ever bought for New Year's. So this is sushi that one of the students made, and we had to eat it. That was the problem. So here we are having some fun. We also did go to Meido Kissa. We also did go to karaoke. Actually, on this trip, we went 5 times to karaoke. We also did go to Ryogoku and enjoyed a little bit of sumo and, of course, izakaya almost every night. So this is kind of the program that we went. And I want to just show you very small 15-second clips of how we interacted with the community. And we have 3 short videos. So this is at Genki Mura with Nadeshiko.
エールを送りたいと思います。ただ聞いてるだけで結構でございます。よろしく。で、元気村を一文字ずつ英語で、スペルします。で、それはなんて、読むのと言ったらみんな元気村と言います。2回言います。で、誰がナンバー1なのって言った時がサプライズです。よろしいですか Okay, are you ready? With your right hand up? Okay. Give me a G.
G.
Give me an E.
E.
Give me an N.
N.
Give me a K.
K.
Give me an I.
I.
Give me an M.
M.
Give me a U.
U.
Give me an R.
R.
Give me an A.
A.
What's that spell?
Genki Mura.
What's that spell?
Genki Mura.
Who's number 1?
Nadeshiko.
We said thank you to Jen. This is the end. But our favorite song was Zundokobushi. So we, that became the song for us. So here we are singing Zundokobushi with Jen Dokobushi.
One more time. Hey. Jen, 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 go. Hey.
The last one, another 7 seconds, is when we visited Ofunato with the high schoolers, and the local guy, a singer from Ofunato, has this song, so we sang the song together. Thank you very much. As you can tell, we had a lot of fun, and I think the local people will remember us. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think we now know why Takeuchi Sensei's program at the business school has 3 times as many applicants as any other program. So let me now turn things over to Professor Mori.
Thank you very much for inviting me today for this day of remembrance and reflection on what we do. And thank you, Susan, for inviting me. You've been just a godmother for all of us, Japanese, cultural, global. It's been just wonderful. So I will just only talk about 3 things. And when I was invited, they said, can you tell us what you have been doing? I said, I'm a professor at Harvard, I teach here. I'm an architect in New York City. And I really am not on the ground to do any work which is of any value. And also as an architect, and also a professor, I feel, just because I will talk about, I've been a nonprofit organization of reconstruction for a number of years, that one can actually create unnecessary stress if non-experienced people are there, and then relief should be handled by the experts, that's my opinion. And also my story is I'm a civilian, just one person, and then within the research I have been doing and how it interacted, but the way also that Bestor shows that something we do, each one of us, does contribute a great deal, it multiplies. So the first project I show is a continuation of research with World Economic Forum, a Global Agenda Council. It's about 70 experts on different global agenda get together. I was the chair of a design innovation. So one of the projects we are starting is called Environmental Index, and we've been talking to Tokyo Electric, the evil guys. But what we found is that they have kept a data of enormous amount of electricity use in each household. And they were just sitting on this data. In Japan, is one of the only developed country whose domestic electrical use, power use, is more than industry or commercial. This is really amazing. So if anyone going to Japan, you can imagine going to a household, they have teapot, is hot teapot is going, TV is going, a radio is going, hot rice is cooking, and hot bath is still kept hot, and famous hot toilet seats. Computers on, it's an enormous amount. So we actually were talking to Tokyo Electric even 2 days before, because our initiative is to create an environmental index so that this particular index can monitor the usage of electricity. And then also to be used at normal time. And I was talking to Mr. Kondo. He was with the government about using Twitter in time when electricity usage is surging to let people know. But don't put people into panic, because yes, people will behave in abnormal times, but idea is to create an environmental index because Japan has data. And then Japan's policy has been green, so we've been talking to government officials, let's make it a model for global practice. 2 days before the disaster, we are talking together. And in collaboration with Kohei Nishiyama in Japan, we are making this. We are going to launch it just as a monetary system. And then it took place. The disaster happened. We like a Friday night before, and we did not know what to do. But we actually made this incentive monitoring regulation as an important part of how to regulate the energy use. And of course, in the very beginning of looking at this particular thing, we said what we're doing is completely useless. We can't do anything because people have to be spending energy-saving lives. And then what we saw is this was top-down system. When Fukushima nuclear plants, which was supplying 30% of electricity to Tokyo metropolitan area, went bust. And the same image, this is one of the iconic images of disaster happened, that the system completely reversed, which is it went upside down. I have to say government was not very helpful, except that local people in local townships in small cities, they were resilient. They were helping each other, they are making each other intact with each other, so helping escape route and all that. So system reversed. So we were just wondering what happened. And then by observation, by talking to people about what's going to happen, but we quickly realized that this happened in February, but electricity use in metropolitan Tokyo will increase enormously when they start using air conditioning in the summertime. And we are looking at the facts that people when they were evacuated, they were laying out themselves as they used to live in their homes, their neighbors and next to neighbors. They were self-organizing. They are making its own community resilience organization, using technology to communicate with each other in Twitter. And I have a theory, I talked to Mr. Kondo, that Twitter is very, very popular with Japanese because of tanka and haiku, the brevity. I think it's really much more, how do I say, culturally much more conducive media than Facebook then. But it was amazing how Twitter was going through looking for people all the time. And with the same group, we are making environmental index, some young global leaders, including Joy, the MIT media guy, Joe Ito, and then Stanford people made this hashtag called Honyak Week. You might know because they were trying to translate all the news coming from prime minister's office, local media, into French, English, so that foreigners can survive. And then all this saving energy, saving electricity. And what we try to do is to come up, we use this environmental index, and we collaborated with Isana, which is a social media company, which had 800,000 subscribers. And looking at TEPCO's data, we realized that 1 million people, about 7 to 8% of Tokyo population, if 1 million people turned off air conditioning, they can save the crisis. But we are really thinking that it's going to go head off into a blackout shortage. So in a sense, looking at the future after effect of what's happening so that we realize this behavioral change, voluntary system without causing a panic, to use simple means of informing public about normal usage, and then they can monitor. Is second, using Twitter for alarming system, and third, using social media. So it becomes a part of a conversation so that behavior change occurs. So as you have going through this, we kind of gone back to regulation, incentive monitoring. In terms of government, they have regulations for offices and commercial use, and they were able to save altogether 22%, 15% by regulation, and 7% by voluntary work. So this was very, very important subject matter and study for us. This is a design systems, but how you change the behavior. So in a way, something we are studying previous to this particular disaster, we are able to use it. And Shohei is continuing to use this particular environmental index to monitor use of resources, carbon dioxide emissions, and then also water usage. So this particular project is continuing on as very important behavioral change. And from architectural point of view, yes, the buildings consume 40% of energy, electricity, and so forth. But then unless the use pattern is changed by individuals, we really can't avoid any of what we call energy excess use at all. Technology can't help. But so my talk is really about how does human being, me personally, embrace this particular disaster? How do we contribute? How does each person's role in this particular disaster phenomena that we are going to happen? The second talk is as a board member of Architecture for Humanity, which is a US-based operation operating for 10 years. It's a global organization, very famous, going into Haiti, going into Rwanda, Kenya. It's a reconstruction organization. It's not a relief organization, meaning that relief, as I mentioned before, there are others, Red Cross, other specialty groups who are fast and able to help. But there are few organizations who are invested in reconstruction of communities. One is because there are very few funding for reconstructing a community. And second, it's long term. We think it will take 10 years for any community to recover and get reconstructed. And that is a long term, and none of politicians are going to stay that long. So it's really not very popular cause. And also for Architectural Humanities, we invest and rebuild areas that government and municipality may ignore, but that becomes a critical element in a community building, community survival. And if you really see it after Kobe, because of a wealth of Japan, it has recovered, but the people who were living there never came back. I'm from Kobe, so going back to the city, it's not like that anymore. And then my parents actually lived in Iwaki, and that place is wiped out, and then people may not come back. So it's not going to be the same. It's a very difficult thing. So with Architecture of Humanity, we are looking at long term, and then built a headquarters in Ishinomaki. As you can see, it's probably the worst hit area, and I think your students visited there. It's one of the larger cities in that area. And centered on that, and those what was last year, this was bottom is the time, and it's actually recovering and reconstruction. I think municipality efforts are amazing, and transportations operation. When I was there in Ishinomaki, this was mid-February, Nihon Seishi Kogyo, a Japanese pulp company, started operation already last year, and railroad system to bring back and forth the paper goods were already just started. So there's a big celebration of railroad system starting out. And this was top is at the time, 2 years ago, a year ago, and that's what I have seen. So a lot of cleaning up efforts are going through, but you will see the places are empty. Many children in elementary school systems are bunched together in other schools, and some of the schools will never be recovered, meaning that this school really is very close to coastline, and there may be a danger for future issues. And especially this Okawa Shogakko, which is Okawa Elementary School, very close to Onagawa, and that's where 70% of kids had died. And that's how it's remaining as a memorial. And then this was a year ago today, and then that was about a month ago here. And that's what it used to look like in Nakashima in Ishinomaki. And today it is empty. In the middle, if you can see, is a Statue of Liberty, but broken Statue of Liberty, valiantly holding her torch for the future reconstruction efforts. And that's the area where it looked like, and that's how it is. So many places are emptied out, and then resilient people are still living there. But central shopping area, because the bottom, all the shops are flooded, and shopkeepers lived upstairs, so they are all closed down. So there's no life in small shopping area, and still this is like just a month ago. Still is condemned properties throughout and empty. So for the Architecture of Humanity, we have done about 11 projects, all small community-based projects. And then from activities to sculpture installations, and also most recently working with Globis Sendai School. Globis is business school started in Tokyo for #1 entrepreneurial business school, Mr. Yoshito Hori. And he has opened another business school in Sendai to promote businesses and help consult people in that area. So idea is that we help to build buildings and also infrastructures, small, but then we realize that going from now, you really need to tie the designers and hardware with the software business community. And recently got funding from Prudential Foundation. And as we speak, they're interviewing different proposals from local people. And also another thing about Architectural Humanity is that architects are local people. And then people who operate are also local and also Japanese at the moment. And most recently, I think Professor Kawaichi may be interested that there's a health issues with children in the area, especially in Fukushima, because kids were not able to play outdoors, playgrounds are destroyed. There's an obesity issue is quite prominent in that area. So we have gotten funding from Nike Foundation in Pharr to build a students' playground. In Japanese we call futsal. It's a small soccer fields. And then a community around it in Kamaishi, which is a new project going forward. So I will show two projects. One is Miami, is in a small seaport, very typical of that area. And I have to say the coastline of this Tohoku area is heartbreakingly beautiful. If anyone have been to a Big Sur, the coastline, Route 1 from San Francisco to Los Angeles, it's like that. It's one town after the other, incredibly beautiful. But I think environmental ministry has a plan to develop into a tourist area to reintroduce new business in this area, which I'm happy to see. But this is one of those small ports. And then it was destroyed completely. And then one of the most important social elements for fishermen is banya. Banya is where they stored boats, where the fishermen hang out together and talk and figure out and understand the weather, what to catch, what to go. So this was competition, and Hirotaka Kobayashi, who was a DDS student at GSD, was working on the systems of building to use plywood so that anyone can build it very easily. So in this case, was fishermen were actually building this particular building. It's accessible, inexpensive. It will be cut elsewhere, brought on site, and assembled quickly. So this banya is under construction, and I think this just opened for fishermen to come in. And it's experimental building, but what's interesting about it is that research of system is quickly deployed because its architect had an idea of something inexpensive, easy to build, accessible system that they were able to deploy for us. So the volunteers are working on it from Architecture of Humanity and also Mr. Kobayashi's office. Well, these are some landscape you see, very empty, it's cleaned up, but in a way, how is it going to recover? How are you going to repopulate? In some of the buildings, you can just see the forces, amazing forces. I, as an architect, have never seen building reinforced concrete building plucked out of foundations and lying like this. So this is an incredible sight, but I think they will try to keep that as a monument. And I think you have also shown this. This is really a group of hoteliers and then innkeepers who those hotels collectively built this temporary housing and also for guests. In Ishinomaki area, population is 150 to 160,000, but over 2 years, there were 280,000 volunteers. So there were a lot of transient volunteers, and also when I was going there are a lot of construction going on, and people are investing, governments investing, business investing back. There are a lot of temporary workers. There's actually, in fact, shortage of housing. This is Shigeru Ban's temporary housing, which is built on the site, and it's probably one of the more humane temporary housing. And this is artist space, gallery space to make some social spaces. And also same community built a store, which they have on currency, and they're doing very well. But stores all wiped out, so they really have to build another business space. And also the people have needed the stores to go and shop. There's some landscape there. You can see that in Ishinomaki, how high the water came in that particular level here. So we had a symposium, a conference with local residents and Architecture of Humanity, and then business people about different aspects of the project report. And you'll see her project later on. And this is called We Are One. And this is a project where she identified that among temporary housing, there are no shops people can go and walk to buy food. And there are no place for local businessmen to sell their food, local businesses, retail, and fishermen, and then farmers. It's a local market so that people, especially elderly, can come and buy food. And also they are missing essential elements where kids will come and have after school, and also where mothers might hang out, and also the little kids' childcare center. So these are things that governments don't fund. And this was designed by local architect who lost his business and house, and he was given this project to design it. And when I was there, local people are making local business graphic projects, and kids were having English lessons, and then our kids were doing homework. here. This project was funded by a project called Paper Cranes for Japan. It's a collaboration with Students Rebuild. So the project is that each student will fold one paper crane, this little, oribazuru, and then Bizo Family Organization would donate $2 toward it. So the idea is 200,000, but kids were very busy folding cranes, and now it raised more than $500,000 to date. It's really amazing. So kids from 38 countries. And one of the most important thing about this fact is the first group of kids who volunteered to fold cranes were the kids from Haiti. The kids who suffered a similar fate of earthquake, displacement, and missing of school. So they put together the first 1,000 cranes and send it off in the first race. So those kids' money was used to give to this community to build this small community projects here. And that's a market, as you can see. And the graphic projects they are making, there are 13 fishing towns there. They have its own logo, and also a particular geographic location. And also it shows where the kids' schools are. So how the community related, they're making these maps and making tenugui, little towels to sell and promote, and graphic designer making package. So this is Mrs. Sato who initiated this project, and she lost her husband. I mean, he's still not found. But she has really found a new value in the way she lives, and she single-handedly proposed this project, and then with the community handling it. And my lesson to it is, yes, there are deep sadness in the community, but then there are new values found. And another person I met was a fisherman who, the community of 250 fishing boats, there are only 3 boats left. And he couldn't work in his fishing port anymore, so he reverted to forestry. And his idea is that instead of complaining, he says, I'm now in the forestry business. I'm going to be harvesting, but also replanting forests for my kids' generation, grandkids' generation. From what I learned is I have to be able to help others. I have to change the way I live. What I do has to help next generation. So what I'm hopeful is that these individual messages for different people who had gone through it is coming out. And I do think, because there are a lot of stories coming out in Japanese newspaper, that value systems being changed enormously. So last project I talk about is a project at the GSD with the students. It's a portable concert hall, started as a studio and seminar project, and we are calling Paracoustica. We just formed a nonprofit to produce it in collaboration with a senior fellow of Kennedy School Hauser Center and also a founder of Youth Orchestra Americas. The idea is to have a portable concert hall inspired by Philip Glass, you can see his back, as a contemporary classic music composer. And his idea is that I'm a nomad and I have to bring music to remote and underserved communities. But when I performed in Athens, it rained and people brought umbrellas over to shelter the musicians. Is this an inspiration? Can your students work with me to make a portable concert hall? He's the first musician to have a benefit concert at Japan Society in New York after March, and right in April. So we were collaborating on this particular project before this tsunami and earthquake disaster hit. And Philip always said, I think what you're saying has to go to Tohoku. And I said, Philip, how are we going to do this? Other people have more things to do than playing music. So he was like, no, music is a sustenance for life. But we did hear the report that people in the area wanted food and water, and I heard utaga hoshi means they want songs, they want music. The silence in this community is devastating. They want music. So Philip was saying, you see, I'm right. But it took a long way because we're working on prototypes and ideas to make umbrellas. And also, first prototype was Africa to save water, rainwater, so that it becomes water resources and given shade and acoustical different module. And we are building for 300, 600, 900 communities. And that's actually the project we're working on. So And one of the most amazing things is that we were showing this project to umbrella maker in Kyoto. And then he said, oh, yes, it's umbrellas, we can make it. But then he says, you have to work with a larger umbrella company. Introduce us to Taiyo Kogyo, which is one of the biggest membrane company in Japan. In the world, they have 70% market, in fact. It's really amazing. They use traditional techniques, but use most technological advanced engineering to produce temporary structures. So these are the prototype modeling, and they are collaborating with us to make the first prototype. And in collaborative agreement, they said the first prototype we want to bring to Tohoku. And I had a meeting with Prime Minister's Office of Japan and showed the project. They really like us to bring it, hopefully for the next year, the 3rd anniversary. So the way it is, this is a research project. It's not really for it, but we think sometimes when you're working on something, your consciousness works, and then it's just meant for what it is. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And our third presenter is Ichiro Kawachi of the School of Public Health.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm interested in health, obviously, but the health of the Japanese in particular. Why are they so long-lived, and how do they manage to age successfully? And many people believe it's part of the answer lies in their diet and universal access to healthcare. I think these are important, but one of the things that I'm particularly interested in focusing on is their social cohesion. We call in our business we call the social capital. I think in the aftermath of the disaster, if you've been a Japan watcher, you would have noticed a rise in the popularity of the word kizuna, which I think expresses the idea of social cohesion and social capital. Now, I'm going to quickly define social capital. This is not my work. It's really the work of sociologists like Bourdieu and Coleman, who said we can define social capital as resources that we can access through social networks. So many kinds of, when we hang out with other people, our friends, community members, we may access through our social connections different kinds of resources, such as access to information, instrumental resources that help us get things done. Social reinforcement is another kind of resource, and you can see that in this little picture I've drawn. An individual is connected to their friends and acquaintances through which they may access these things. When we extend the network out to the whole group, such as you might observe in a community, or if you go outwards, that you might even think about it as a phenomenon of describing different societies. Then you begin to get some emergent properties, such as the ability of the group to exercise informal control over the behavior of other members of the group, as well as ability to undertake collective action. And both of these things, it turns out, may have relevance for post-disaster recovery and resilience. Informal control is very important in policing the occurrence of problems like looting. Many people in the aftermath of the March 11 disaster noted the absence of looting in affected Japanese communities, and I think some of that is because of the social cohesion, and that's very strongly felt across Japanese society. I mentioned the word kizuna, but those of you who speak Japanese, you'll know it's expressed in many cultural phrases and sayings, such as otagai-sama, a very popular phrase in the area where we work. Mochitsumo taretsu. I mean, there are many kinds of expression of this kind. And collective efficacy has already been mentioned, that in the slowness of formal agencies to provide aid to stricken areas, you really depend upon the ability of the local community to organize relief efforts. Now, there's a very interesting book that just came out by Daniel Aldrich, who I think used to be at Harvard, and it specifically concerns social capital and disaster resilience. And in this book, he describes case studies based upon the 1923 Kanto earthquake and the 95 Hanshin Awaji earthquake that struck Kobe. And these are very detailed case studies. Fortunately for me, he hasn't quite gotten to the Tohoku earthquake, but that's where I'm going to go with my talk. Anyway, this book describes three salient reasons why this kind of social cohesion might be important for disaster recovery. Disaster recovery defined as the ability of the community to repopulate after disaster is stricken. And in my case, recovery means the ability of people to get back on their feet, to overcome problems like PTSD and loss in functioning. So the three reasons he gives in this book. Number one is that obviously social connections serve as a kind of informal insurance for victims, so that when disaster strikes, we may draw upon them for financial, informational, and emotional assistance. That's a very obvious benefit of social connections. A couple others interesting. He sort of Aldrich kind of draws upon Hirschman's exit voice and loyalty. He says that the second reason why cohesion is important is because better connected communities are more effective at mobilizing residents to voice their demands and extract resources from authorities. That's the collective efficacy or collective action part of the social capital. If you've all, I'm sure everyone's been in a community where there was some perceived threat or problem, like a local noise abatement problem or something. What we would like to do is to gather petitions and protest to local authorities. But of course, there's a collective action problem, which is that most of the time we're too busy. We'd rather our neighbors or someone else did it for us. And if we could get away with it, we would rather free ride on the effort of others. But the theory of social capital says that when there are dense connections between network members, that becomes less likely, because if you free ride, this will have a proportional effect on damaging your reputation as someone who free rides on the effort of others. And hence, it makes it much more likely that communities are able to get together, collect petitions, lobby local government for additional resources, and in essence, express their voice. A third kind of benefit of social capital is that cohesive communities tend to raise the cost of exit from embedded networks. So if you have already established connections with your neighbors and your community, then once something like a tsunami strikes and you leave the area, it makes it less likely that you will then stay away forever. Social capital is a kind of gravitational pull that brings people back for reconstruction and recovery. All right, so what's all this got to do with what I'm doing? Basically, I've been collaborating for almost a decade with colleagues in Japan. My colleague, Professor Kondo Katsunori from Nihon Fukushi University, has been establishing a nationwide longitudinal study of about 60,000 Japanese people who are scattered. We've sampled them from throughout Japan, including as far south as Okinawa. Now, we established this baseline in 2010. During the summer of 2010, we collected these 36,000 surveys from residents in Japan, and just by pure accident, one of the towns which we sampled was in Miyagi Prefecture, the town of Iwanuma, which is has a population of about 50,000 people. It's just south of Sendai, and as it turned out, about 50 miles east of the epicenter of the earthquake. So we collect information about residents' health. We collect information about their health habits, their diet, their physical activity, sleeping habits, stress, the social networks, community cohesion, everything we want to know about what predicts health among aging people in Japan. And that was the baseline. But 7 months after the survey was collected, the earthquake and tsunami struck, and this is the town of Iwanuma being swallowed by the 3 waves of tsunami that struck that town. So we have what econometricians call a natural experiment. We have information on the health and health habits of people prior to the earthquake, and now we're going to go back and study what happened to them afterwards. We have the ability now to study the before and after, which is extremely rare in disaster resilience studies. So this is a map of Iwanuma, Sendai to the north, Fukushima to the south, and this is the Pacific Ocean. The red line is the extent to which the tsunami waves reached land, and the blue circles are the exact residences of where people in our study were located at the time of the baseline survey. You can see that some people escaped in terms of not having their houses destroyed. Others, the houses were completely wiped out. So we have within this natural experiment a kind of a difference between people who felt the earthquake but whose houses were spared, and in other cases the houses were damaged and they had to relocate. So we're going to, and of course a lot of these aggregations represent villages, each of which has distinct levels of social cohesion as based upon surveys that we conducted at baseline. So there's variation in how cohesive people felt their neighborhoods were prior to the earthquake, and that we can use to study, how does that affect their recovery and resilience following the disaster. So as most people probably saw on the media reports, 10 days after the disaster, the Japanese, even were relatively prepared by world standards. A lot of the residents who lost their homes were evacuated to schools and wherever there was a public space. And then about 8 months later, local governments had provided for them these temporary shelters, kasetsu jutaku as it's called. And in the Iwanuma, which is our field site, most people have been settled in these prefabricated buildings. There's this, I'm not sure, it's a little bit hard to see, but that's Kondo Kazudori Sensei, who's my close collaborator from Nihon Fukushi Daigaku, and Jun Aida Sensei is also a collaborator based in Tohoku Daigaku, which is very, very local. So the point of the study, actually, we're just about to get funded by the National Institutes of Health. Our hypothesis is that earthquake and tsunami survivors who lived in neighborhoods with lower levels of social cohesion at baseline will experience faster rates of decline in functional independence over 3 years of follow-up. As you may know, the majority, 2/3 of the victims of the affected region were over the age of 65. This is a disaster which primarily struck aging populations, and there's very little information we know about what predicts recovery for aging people when exposed to disaster. And as I mentioned just a moment ago, we have survey measures at baseline of what we call social capital or social cohesion, meaning people's perceptions of the extent to which their neighbors are trustworthy, the extent that they informally socialize with others in the community, the extent to which people participate and volunteer in community organizations. And we've sort of mapped out the town so that we have 99 different neighborhoods, or gyoseiku as we call it. And then the outcome we're interested in studying, I mean, everybody studies PTSD and mental health symptoms, but in this case, we have an opportunity to study the effects of a disaster on aging outcomes. We want to know what is it that predicts maintenance of functional independence and healthy aging in this population. So we have continuous IADL is independent activities of daily living, which is an index composed of things like, are you able to bathe yourself? Can you go to the toilet without assistance? Are you able to dress yourself? Do you go shopping? Are you able to use public transport? All things that matter to the quality of lives of aging people. I think I'm just going to quickly summarize. We've analyzed some baseline data. These are not prospective data. We're just checking to see that our data line up according to what is known about disability, and that our data are giving plausible results. These are regression data where the outcome is the IADL score. the higher the score, the more functionally independent you are. And you can see that age, if you look at this column labeled beta, you see that age lines up the way we expect. The older you are, the more function you tend to lose. There's no gender difference in the study. There's somewhat of an effect on marital status. Those who are never married or widowed relative to those who are currently married have worse functioning. That's a well-described effect of marriage on helping people to maintain functioning as they age. Marriage is a wonderful pill, actually. And then when we come to education, we see there's a socioeconomic gradient. Less educated people tend to lose function faster, probably because of an accumulation of stress and deleterious health behaviors over the life course. Smoking, bad diet, sedentarism, all these things lead to much more rapid decline in aging among the less educated compared to the more educated. Now, the interesting bit is this. In addition to well-known relationships between lifestyle factors and maintenance of healthy aging, you see that the social realm matters as well. So if you socialize with your friends often, that's a big positive effect. It's almost as large as being married. So if you're not married and you're widowed or divorced, as long as you hang out with your friends, you can maintain function, and they'll do as a substitute. Now, the really interesting bits for us is that this cell here, because now these are multi-level results, meaning we're controlling for individual level factors as well as neighborhood level predictors of functioning. And we find that regardless of who you are as a person, even if you are the same person with same education, same health habits, same marital status, this is showing that depending on what kind of neighborhood you live in, whether it's cohesive or not, it can have a significant effect on your functional status. If your neighbors all like to hang out with each other, you have neighbors who are constantly socializing, this has a protective effect on health. Or put another way, if your neighbors don't hang out with each other, you lose 4 points in functioning. And if your neighbors participate, or if, in this case, if they don't participate in civic activities, volunteer and so forth, this is significantly bad in terms of your risk for loss of functioning, regardless of all of your other these are all controlled for individual variations in characteristics. The only thing we didn't find that predictive was trust. But there's some interesting anecdotal stories we've heard to kind of buttress these kinds of results. We've been talking to local volunteers who've been helping with the community to recover, and they tell us a very interesting story, which is that when they, immediately after the disaster, whilst residents were being lining up on the waiting list to get into the kasetsu jutaku, the temporary housing shelters, they said that there are two types of communities. There's a type of community where they basically decided everyone's going to move in on a first-come, first-served basis. So they drew a lottery, and whoever won moved into these places first. And as a consequence, they all got scattered to the four winds. By contrast, some other communities, basically their village headman came up and said, oh, we're not going to move. Nobody's going to move and be relocated among this group of villages until you can all accommodate us together. And very interestingly, we haven't done the follow-up survey, so I can't show the numerical data to prove this, but the anecdote says that there's been a great difference in the trajectory of recovery between people based on these two types of villages. In the village where everyone's stuck together, their functioning has been maintained, whereas those who got separated, the main thing that's happened, according to the rescue workers, the town officials, is that the elderly, particularly the older women, no longer have a reason to put on makeup, spend hours getting dressed up in order to visit their neighbors. And consequently, they become stuck within their sheltered homes. This is almost, the Japanese call this like a hikikomori jotai, And as they lose the reason to go out and socialize, their functioning has been rapidly declining. I think that's one case in which social cohesion might matter for recovery after disaster. So if we show this graphically, this is what we're trying to prove. That is, prior to the instance of the disaster, we're showing that at baseline, people who live in high social capital communities tend to have better functional independence compared to those who live in low social capital communities. The line slopes downwards because, as far as I know, everyone's function goes down the page until we finally drop dead. But what we're showing here is that with the shock of the earthquake, in both groups, that decline is accelerated, but it's accelerated much faster. Or put another way, it is maintained for a longer period if you happen to be blessed with living in a high social cohesion community. So that's what we're about to prove. I think if you invite me back in next year or maybe the year after, perhaps I'll report the results. Our hypotheses that there's variability observed in the resilience of communities following exposure to disaster. This is a well-established paradox of disaster research, that the same disaster has enormous variation in terms of its consequences. Secondly, that we think among many other factors that determine how bad a disaster is on the health of the community, we think social cohesion is going to be a big explanatory factor. And that lastly, we hope through knowledge like this that we can develop interventions to target social capital to assist community recovery. It's very important to provide the material resources for rebuilding and so forth, but just as important is investing in the social participation and engagement of the victims. And to that end, it's very interesting that Iwanuma City in particular has been trying to establish social participation by holding monthly meetings with residents where they discuss mutual issues and problems that they might be able to solve. This is just a picture from courtesy of Dr. Ida, taken earlier this year, showing in the meeting hall of the Kasetsu Jutaka how the town officials are getting together. I guess the volunteers you can recognize by their yellow vests, getting together with local residents in these areas to troubleshoot and discuss solutions. This is exactly what we call linking social capital. It's the kind of social capital which links communities to authorities in order to lubricate exchange and move things along. And you'll notice, by the way, that it's very interesting that this is not only a business meeting, but judging by the large bottles of sake in the background, it also has a social function. And I would dare say that bottle probably is like hakurakse or something, for locally brewed sake from the Tohoku region. Anyways, I hope this gives a taste of the kind of research that public health is engaging in with the disaster area to try to understand. It's a piece of the puzzle of Japanese longevity and healthy aging. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And so I will ask the panelists to join me. We have just actually quite a limited amount of time for questions, so I'd like you to ask, I'll call on 3 people to ask questions. Could you keep it very, very brief? No need to introduce yourself. Let's move quickly. Who would like to ask the first question? Okay, I will, which is the government came off looking pretty bad in all 3 of the stories you told. Is that a general conclusion we should draw, or can you point to ways in which the government did, in some cases, move actually quite quickly and constructively? Next question. Yes.
I'm also kind of want to ask that what the government should do for the kind of true recovery of the Tohoku region, because all of you are focusing on kind of really recovery process for what they were before the earthquake, but like the Mori sensei says, that several people are trying to build a renewal that their industries or their activities. So what the local people thinking about what the government should do to build up more kind of new industry or new business conditions or stuff like that.
Okay, I'll take 2 more questions, and then I'll ask each of the panelists to respond. Andy Gordon.
Yes, I was very interested in a kind of disjunction between the tone, especially of Takeuchi sensei, Mori sensei's presentations, and what I typically read in the Japanese newspaper about recovery, which is to say, both of you were relatively optimistic. Things that are being done, things that are happening, things that are being built, the pace. It's impressive. The tone coming out of the newspaper is it's 2 years and we've still got X tens of thousands of people in temporary housing with no sense yet of where their permanent homes will build. The communities are deadlocked, even among themselves, disregarding whether the government's doing a good job about whether they should move upland or where or what, and some want to stay and some want to go upland. And so I'm interested in your thoughts about that disconnect and how we might think about it.
Okay, I'll take one more question because you're being brief. Yes.
I'm from Pakistan, and all of these stories in our context, we had an earthquake in 2005, massive flooding in 22, and these stories just seem inspirational. I'm trying to figure out what kind of lessons there can be for other parts of the world, and how can we work on these things together.
All right. Let's start on the other end with Kawachi-san. Do you want to comment?
Regarding a government response, it was surprising, wasn't it, that many people believe that Japan was the most disaster-prepared country in the world, and yet they seem to have this, same kind of deadlock at the highest levels. I think, some of that probably was related to issues in central government. I just finished reading a very interesting book by the Asahi Shimbun reporter. I'm just blanking on his name, but the title of the book is called
Funabashi.
Yeah, it was called Kantei no Hyakujikan, which means 100 hours of the Prime Minister's residence, describing all the horrendous miscommunications and mishaps that occurred. And some of that I attribute to the relative newness of the government, plus the disconnect between the Prime Minister's office and the bureaucracy and all the outlying. So there may be. It's not in my place to sort of describe why is it that they failed in that sense. But I do think that the community responsiveness has been far greater than observed in other countries. And moreover, as I've tried to explain, what's really interesting to a social epidemiologist is the variations between communities, even within the same country. And that's what we're trying to really pin down to, try and see what is it that we can do to make things better next time. And, I think this idea of social cohesion, we can either directly intervene on it, or we can sort of map it out and try to figure out where are the vulnerability spots that we may invest in to prepare for future contingencies. I think, we're still trying to figure out how best to translate this kind of information for intervention, but I think that's the extent to which, I see the lessons that can be drawn here.
Professor Mori.
I think the interesting thing about government is that I was in this summit called G1 Summit in February, which is next generation of leaders. In Japan, there are so many young mayors and governors all over the country. It's really amazing. So the idea is invest more on local government because they have much more proximity to immediate disaster. And then, for example, Tohoku is very unique. It's very spread out. It's a vast region. It had involved many different municipalities. And there's a systematic break between central government, who wants like a monolithic policy, whereas the strategy even between Fukushima, which suffered from nuclear disaster, is very national policy related. But what Miyagi suffered has nothing to do with, it's more localized. So the idea for any country, lesson learned, is to empower local government in many different municipalities so they are invested, they are prepared. And then, yes, of course, it takes time for central government, like transportation issues, energy issues, but they will prepare within some time-based manner that one can deal with it. And also, I have to say that I'm not that optimistic. I said that it would take 10 years, and even after Kobe earthquake, it didn't completely recover. And then there aren't too many strategies to really think of 10 years term. The only thing I saw and I observed was Accenture has invested in Fukushima Future Institute, and they said they invested for 10 years of voluntary work, charity work, but eventually to invest in a community to make an economic basis. So another thing that government can do is to make it economic incentive zone, to make it interesting and make it attractive for not only Japanese business, but global business to be invested in this area. So I think there are two things I can think about. And also your question about inspiration is, I really agree with Professor Kawachi. Japan is a, let's say, more homogeneous community. So social cohesion is a little easier than crazy New York with everybody's opinions and they don't get along and all that. But there are examples that social cohesion as a practice worked very well in terms of saving community. I think very inspirational human stories that we can tell about the future preparedness, I think.
Are we supposed to answer all three questions, or
Answer as you'd like.
Oh, the ones
selectively.
I like to address all three. I'll be very brief. On Hiro's question, I think you need to define what you mean by government. I think when we went to Davos last year, Kan-san was there, the former prime minister, and Funabashi-san asked him the question in Davos in front of 80 people. If you had 20/20 hindsight, what would you do differently as prime minister? His response was, nothing. And we were all stunned. And we couldn't believe his answer. So one of us asked him the same question in a different way. John Ehara asked him, he didn't say he must be kidding, but he basically said, let me rephrase the question that Funabashi-san asked. 20/20 hindsight, same question. And second time, his response was, there was nothing I would have changed. So there's something wrong with him and the Democratic Party, right? So you're with METI, and so, it's very different on how the central government should behave. I think leave it up to METI, who have not gotten into that kind of a problem. And also there's the local city government, and you have the funds, you can allocate it to cities, but it was a disaster having the Democratic Party in charge. So I don't know if it helps your cause or not. But in terms of the disconnect that Andy raised, yes, there's a disconnect, especially if you read Asahi Shimbun. But if you go read the Fukko Shimbun in Ishinomaki, the picture is very different. So I think, when you say media, again, it's the national media, the Asahi Shimbuns of the world, and they get probably more circulation by telling horror stories and what's wrong stories. So I think there's clearly a disconnect. But when you go to the individual cities, you see optimism, and you talk to the city officials. There's optimism. So I think we're looking at the real thing. And I think the big newspapers are really not sending their people to the gemba. And that's why we're kind of looking at this disconnect. In terms of lesson for other countries, what Kawachi-san mentioned, Genki Mura is a city, a mura that I showed the picture where we did the give me a G, give me an E, right? And the mayor of that city insisted on having everybody in the kasetsu jutaku live in the same order as they used to live. So there was this social cohesion was kept. And you saw how Genki these guys were, right? And I think a lesson to be learned is don't use a lottery system, and don't be too fair, but insist on this kind of rebuilding the town as it used to be, even if you're going to move into a temporary housing. And I think Genki Mura would be probably the best example to show. And look at all the food they served us. It was great. Let me stop there.
Okay, so let's have a final question. Oh, okay, two final questions to start with. You.
Thanks. I was really interested in the way that all of the presenters talked about the idea of volunteerism, and also perhaps we could expand that to the idea of outsiders, quote unquote, coming in to help. And it seemed that Takeuchi sensei and Mori sensei had very different perspectives actually on the utility of, as Mori sensei said, like untrained people coming in to help out. And from Kawachi sensei's presentation, I'm wondering about how the idea of external volunteers or outsiders might affect this concept of social cohesion. So I'd just like to put that into the broader context of, there was a New York Times article a while ago that was talking about some very nationalistic discourses in Japan that were explaining why international technology wasn't being used to figure out disposal of nuclear contaminated waste in the area. And the logic was that outsiders would scare the old obasans. So I'm wondering if anybody can talk about this sort of tensions maybe between the concept of quote unquote outsiders and then the kind of social cohesion.
Okay, and your question.
Thank you very much for your presentation. And my question is about the image of Japan. I'm from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and I think people from outsiders are looking Japan as the country who suffered from the earthquake 2 years ago. And now I think it's our turn to show our image, maybe more positive image. Maybe it's too optimistic, but I think in order to sell our country and in order to move on, we need to sell our country as a positive image. And my question is, what kind of image do you think that we can sell to the world after watching after the disaster, whether it's innovation, architecture, or social capital? Thank you.
Let's start from this end this time.
Let me answer the second question. I think the image of Japan, probably the best one you can portray are the high school students in the affected areas. And I think they're going to be the leaders of Japan. Politics, economy, business, they are so resilient, they are so strong, and they are so optimistic. You saw the students, right, at Ofunato. And everywhere we've went, when you look at the kids who were affected, and when you hear their stories, you will have tears in your eyes because their father has passed away and so forth. But those guys are so strong, and they have been coming overseas to New Zealand, to Australia, to the United States, because they know that in order to survive in the global economy, they just can't stay there. So in terms of image, I think focus on the high school or middle school students in Japan, and they are the future of Japan, in my opinion.
Yes.
I think the first question, I do have a strong opinion about it. It's because I've been in communication, some people will see it as untrained volunteers, let's say disaster tourism, are more taxing to communities. And then it's really not helping. Also, their opinion, it does help economy a little bit. The idea behind it does take a long time, and it has to be empowering to the people in the community who are living there. So that unless you have a community buy-in to do what they want to do, and then helping behind the scenes to empower them, I think there's a problem about like a media hungry showiness of people coming in, doing stuff and leaving, because after they leave, maybe I'm sorry, or Harvard business students are wealthy, they can stay in the continent, but people are left with their own problems. So I've seen some communities members being rather depressed after this kind of disaster tourism. So we have to be very sensitive about that. Now, about the image of Japan is that I think this is the best moment for Japan to show humanity, to show different values, which has been traditional values of helping each other, respecting elders, loving the nature, and then building a community. Japan is a country which has suffered many disasters over the years, from a war, thousands of years, earthquake, the fire. Every time it recovers, and then society, by and large, stays intact. I think it gives a very different view. And it's very good to show vulnerability to what you call, instead of Japan as number one. I think it's a very different face.
Yeah, when we visited the mayor of Iwanuma, he told us that just a week before we had arrived, the pop group AKB48 had offered to come and do a concert, and he turned them down because they weren't able to provide anything for the community. I think that summarizes exactly what Mori Sensei was just saying, which is that if you want resilience in long term, it has to come from within the communities. It's very interesting when you speak to people in Tohoku that they say there's been a paradoxical boom in Sendai because hundreds of thousands of volunteers and NGOs have congregated there. You can't get a hotel room for love or money in Sendai because it's completely booked out. The shops are doing wonderfully well. The izakaya, everything's booming. Except the moment you get out of that metropolitan center, everything is just going on at its glacial pace. So I do think there's a sort of, I think these things help in the short term, but you have to pay attention to what was before and then what we can do afterwards for reconstruction. And on that note, I think I've always said the number one export that Japan can teach the world is kizuna, or some notion of that. I happen to think that kizuna is the number one secret ingredient of Japanese longevity and healthy aging. Actually, it's not the fish, it's not the tofu. It's really the social support within families, across generations, and between neighbors. It's a very, very strong ingredient of health, and that's something that probably all of the world can learn from.
That's a wonderful way to end this session. I'd like to thank all of you coming. Will you join me in thanking our panelists?